Hey, welcome to Chapel. I'm Brian Zuniga, Director of Discipleship, and with me today is Dr. Jeff Mooney. Before we get started, we wanted to let you know of a couple things. We have SL training every Wednesday night at 6. Well, not every, just for the next 4 weeks, from 6 to 7. So if you want to grow in your faith, if you want to learn how to use some practical tools to grow deeper in your relationship with God, SL training from 6 to 9, we'll be talking about things like how to get in the Word, how to pray, how to share your faith. So we'd love to see you there. And then SL night is every Wednesday night from 8 to 9. We would love to have you join us and just hearing and learning about how to grow in your faith in a deeper way there too. And then SL groups. If you're not a part of a SL group, if you want a small group on campus, that'd be a great way to get connected. The SL app has all the times and locations listed. But Jeff, thanks for coming.
You bet. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, your title is Professor of Old Testament
Interpretation
and Theology.
Right.
Old Testament interpretation and theology.
Yep.
I don't think I knew the interpretation was in there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I like it.
Well, yeah, they go together. And so your theology is largely dependent upon, how you interpret.
I mean, I guess every English Bible's an interpretation.
In some regard.
And teaches theology.
Yeah. In some regard, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And you teach, what are you teaching this semester?
Yeah, teaching, I've got 3 sections of Old Testament survey. I've got 1 section of Latter Prophets and Writings, Hebrew 2, Hebrew 4, and then I'm also sort of mentoring one of our seniors on his senior project that he chose to do in the book of Jonah. So,
okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, you did your doctoral work in the book of
Leviticus.
Yeah. Okay.
Everyone's favorite book.
We go right there.
Yeah. The great New Year's resolution killer. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Now, why did you pick Leviticus?
Yeah. I have always been, since I've become a Christian, and really even before a little bit, I've always been fascinated by religion and been fascinated by things that are tied to religion, particularly in the ancient world, like creation narratives and temples and rituals and things like that.
So you said growing up?
Growing up, I was fascinated by religion. I didn't actually value it. I mean, I didn't become a Christian until I was in college.
Okay.
And but I did the whole, when you grow up in the Bible Belt, it's kind of easy. You just learn the language and you can fool almost everybody.
Yeah.
And so I did, and I really tried to be good, in large part.
What did you think it was to be a Christian growing up?
I think it was a pure moralism. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it was. I mean, we talked about believing in Jesus and stuff like that. I couldn't have told you what that was. And so for me, I think it was this sense of morality, moralism, the feeling that I had chosen this right way to go, and so it couldn't have been further from historic and biblical Christianity.
Okay.
And but I think it was really common. Like a lot of my friends and I, that we left the church after graduating high school. But,
so you grew up going to church?
Every
Okay.
every time the doors were open.
And then
Mom and Dad were very devoted. Family devotions every night, like every night.
Okay.
Like I'm the worst at family devotions. But my mom and dad were every single night. They were completely locked into that. And but I didn't buy it.
Once you graduated high school, you're out.
Yeah. I tried to maintain it for about a year, and I realized that I just didn't believe this.
Yeah.
And I wanted to live in a very different way than this sort of hyper moralistic way that I had.
So when you say hyper moralist, you're just saying.
Don't smoke, drink, chew, don't do this. I mean, there's a whole list of things that were sort of culturally engineered. Now, I was told they were in the Bible, But after I became a Christian, started reading the Bible,
Where
I
is
was
this?
profoundly confused that some of these things had a big green light, in the Bible, but in Alabama they were not
Right.
green lighted at all, and so it was all sort of cultural morality that sort of engineered it, and I didn't want to live like that anymore.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, like, I think most atheists that I meet actually probably don't have genuine intellectual struggles with the existence of God. Because if you really, like, for example, are given over to scientific method or something like that, you know that you can't prove or disprove something like that.
I don't think it's rare that I talk to an atheist.
Yeah.
I'll immediately ask, "Are you sure there's no God? You're positive there's no God?"
Yeah.
And they'll concede. They'll say, "No, I don't know."
No, there's no way to know.
Oh, you're agnostic.
Yeah, you're agnostic.
Okay, that makes more sense. to
Yeah,
me.
I was more thoughtless than that. I would have said, "Oh, absolutely, there's no God," but I was hedging because I didn't want there to be. So I
you
didn't
were
want to
trying
be
to
because
force that.
I wanted to live the way I wanted to live, and
Yeah.
so I didn't want there to be a God, and because as long as there wasn't a God, then I could be God.
Yeah.
I could be the one who determined my morality, the one who decided, what was okay and what wasn't okay. I didn't care two shakes about an afterlife. I didn't think that there was one, and I didn't, frankly, at that age, I was that kid who just didn't think he was going to die anyway, and so my choices made that obvious, and so that I just. That drove me at that part of my life up until the moment that I became a Christian.
Okay, you got to talk about that.
Yeah. I was in New York, and a buddy of mine who I won't name his name because I know that I know it pains him that he's both happy and pained that he's part of my testimony. But there were three of us in the jazz music program at Auburn that kind of ended up hanging out together, and one of us was like a legitimate Christian, just a really remarkable, devoted, happy, talented, ambitious believer. I mean, the kind of kid that you want your kid to meet if you want your kid to become a Christian. And then the other guy and me were not those things. We were ambitious, particularly in jazz and stuff like that. But outside of that, we were pretty not ambitious. And my other friend was easily the most sort of degenerate guy that I knew. And it wasn't that I lacked for degenerate morality in my life. I was.
You had plenty.
I was degenerate and immoral, and I was a member of. I lived in a fraternity house. I was a professional jazz musician. I mean, so I bumped into those circles pretty substantially, but nothing like this guy. Yeah. And so when the only thing he could have ever told me that I wouldn't have believed about his behavior is what he told me one night when he came in. It was around Halloween, I remember. And he came in and he'd been crying, and I thought that he was just stoned again. And he said he had just become a Christian, and I was like, then I was sure he was stoned, and so I was like, dude, I've got convocation tomorrow. I don't have time for this, And he started weeping, and he said, Jeff, I'm being serious. He goes, I'm clear-minded as I've ever been in my life, and
wow.
And that messed me up. It really messed me up because I was banking on that there wasn't a God, so that I could live the way I could live. And now I was confronted by this kind of undeniable alteration of my friend, who now was he didn't turn into the hyper morality that I'd grown up with. He was a happy, generous guy whose moral life was now utterly transformed, but at the same time he wasn't holding it over anybody. There was a generosity to him, a humility to him, and it really messed me up. And so that following summer, I was in New York, and I decided that I would read the Bible on my own. And so for I started actually with the New Testament, not the Old. I thought the Old Testament was boring.
Yeah, sure.
And so
Yes, professor.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I started reading Matthew, and I got to Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and I just got stuck there for about 2 weeks, and I just read those 3 chapters every day for like 2 weeks, and through that process, I knew.
Yeah.
I knew that I was condemned, and that, I mean, if lust was what Jesus was talking about, and if murder was what Jesus was talking about, I had my own wing in hell.
Yeah.
I was done, and yet at the same time, I inherently knew that I was being shown this not to condemn me, but to rescue me from me.
Yeah.
And of course I've developed that, that language of explanation over time.
Right.
But at that time I knew it. I knew, okay, there's somewhere for me to run. There's not. I don't have to.
There's an out here.
Because I didn't feel. I knew I was condemned, but I didn't feel hopeless at all. I felt like, okay, this is finally. I feel like my eyes have been opened, and that I'm really looking at something very real here. And so there was a mixture of fear and confidence that that there was an out, and so every day I would get on my knees and beside my bed and pray that Jesus would save me. I didn't trust the lingo that I'd grown up using, and so I just said what was on my heart. I mean, I just knew I was condemned, and I begged him to save me. I didn't know what to do to help that,
right,
or if there was anything I could do to help that.
Right.
And so at some point, I just remember knowing that I was saved. I was forgiven.
Yeah.
And so I had the guy I lived with was a Christian pastor, and he was a Jewish guy that had become a Christian. And so at the breakfast table, I chatted with him and told him what had happened, and he was very happy, for me, obviously. And so, yeah.
Now let's go from there to Leviticus.
Yeah,
you picked Leviticus later on.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting. Leviticus talks about holiness.
Yeah, it's the core issue in a lot of ways. Yeah.
So that holiness you see in Leviticus, how is that contrasted with the morality?
Yeah.
The cultural morality, the do right, the be this way. Isn't it easy to draw some of that morality out of Leviticus?
Oh, yeah.
Here's all the right things to do.
Yeah.
And you see the Jewish, the Pharisees.
No, of course. Yeah. So it is, but you can almost instantaneously tell if people are doing that or not, or if they're actually taking holiness seriously by how they draw out of Leviticus. Like, for example, if you are like the Leviticus 18, 19, and 20 are the big holiness chapters.
Okay.
Like that's, everybody knows in Old Testament studies, that they know that's the pool to draw from.
Common knowledge.
It's common knowledge in Old Testament studies. Exactly. And so if you're in a red state, you're going to draw heavy from Leviticus 18 and 20 about homosexuality. Homosexuality is clearly a sin in the Bible, and so you draw heavily from that. If you're a blue state type of Christian, then you draw heavily from Leviticus 19, which emphasizes social what we would call social justice. That's not something they would call that, but it was what we'd call social. They call it holiness. If you don't leave your food, if you don't leave food for the poor, if you don't take care of the disabled, if you don't take care of the elderly, if you don't execute judicial and economic ethics in a proper way, you're not holy. They didn't say you weren't just. It's you're not holy. You don't belong. And so that means it was a big deal. But each type of person will draw from one and ignore the other.
Wow.
And the thing about holiness,
so they're just picking their
they're
favorites.
They're picking. And when they do that, they're demonstrating that that they're still their perception of God is genuinely pagan to some degree, because the keynote for paganism is that the gods are always derived from political and cultural power, and so Pharaoh is just simply an imperial, kind of puppet. He's derived from imperial power, and so it's Yahweh who is, the God of the slaves, who's not derived from any kind of cultural, political power, dominates him, making it clear that the world that ancient Near Eastern religion thought existed does not exist. That there's another world, and this world is populated by this one true living God, so there's no options in picking and choosing. The concept of holiness is ubiquitous, and so it's both deeply satisfying because of how thorough across the board it is, but it's also going to offend everybody as a general rule. The real key, though, to that is not just simply the ubiquitous nature of holiness, ubiquitous meaning that it's everywhere, it defines Israel as a system. It's systemic, and so that's another way to say it that I think most people
it goes everywhere.
It goes everywhere. It's completely systemic and it's supposed to be the thing that defines them. That's why, back in Exodus 19. God calls them uniquely. There's nowhere else in the ancient world where a deity names an entire nation as holy or adopts an entire nation as priests. There is nowhere else. And so, but Exodus 19, that happens. And so this is the fundamental identity.
Describe how that works. Describe how God says you're priest, this entire nation is a priest.
So I think that Eugene Peterson's got this great quote. Adrian drops it in a Redeemer time to time. Adrian Martinez is the elder at Redeemer Baptist Church that is in charge of all of our worship service, our music, everything. And so he's got this great quote from Peterson. It says that every time God calls us to worship him, he calls us into the real world. Oh. So Tolkien and Lewis, we talk about not enlightened worlds. What's the word I'm trying to?
Like Shadowland.
Something. It'll occur to me in a minute.
Fake world.
No, it's not fake. It's actually the opposite of that. It's but it's like it's a world of fairies and gods and spirits and things like that. I don't know why the word's escaping me. I probably need to start a Prevagen at some point. But I can't. But it's this amazing world that Tolkien said pointed to a very real world. And so when God dwells this, God is without any reasonable doubt defined as holy, which means he's incomparable, which means there is no other God like him. There is no other, deity that can even remotely compare to him. And he dwells in this real world. This is his world. And so the ritual world in Leviticus and is his world. And so back in Exodus, after he delivers Israel from Egypt, he calls them a holy nation. So that means that God adopts them, elects them, saves them in order to be this social and systemic testimony to the fact that God is who he is. He's genuinely holy. And there is the world of the gods that produce things like oppression and this sort of feudalistic system that was very common in that period of time. Like those gods don't exist. That this is what men do when you give them full reign. They always exercise power over others. It doesn't matter if they're coming from the right or the left. This deity, this God, though, is different. And so Israel is now adopted as a holy nation and a royal priesthood in order to facilitate and to mediate the reality of this God to the watching world. You see this, even though the language isn't used, you see this in Deuteronomy chapter 4, where God says basically to Israel, the nations will look in on you, and they will see my law. They will note how close I am to you, and they'll take note of that. They'll say, what great God is this that's so close, and what wise people these are that have these laws.
So there's an obvious difference.
Yeah. No, they would notice. Yeah.
Can you give like a 2-sentence definition of holiness?
Yeah, holiness is a relational and ubiquitous sort of element or characterization of God and his people.
Okay.
And so this is the way you characterize God. Everything about God is holy. You can't say that about anything else. Like, you can't say that God's justice is loving, or God's, whether that might be partially true, everything about God is holy.
Okay.
And so holy is the preeminent adjective. It's the preeminent modification.
So to be holy is to reflect God.
It's to reflect God.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So when you grew up hearing about, here's the list of right things to do, that moralism wasn't reflecting God necessarily.
No, not at all. And here's the reason why is that, I've talked about the systemic and ubiquitous nature of holiness, but the real core of holiness, I think the most important aspect of holiness is it is irrevocably relational.
Okay.
Like God calls Israel holy after he rescues them. They belong to him, and he belongs to them. And so it's in the same kind of way that the reason I don't cheat on my wife is not because I'm afraid I'll get caught, but it's because of my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my children, my relationship with my grandchildren, what I want that to be in the future, my relationship with all my students who think that I'm something that if I cheat on my wife, I'm not.
Yeah.
And so the relationships in my life dictate my ethics.
They drive who you
They
are.
drive, they drive my ethics. And so that's a far cry from here's a list of things that you have to do in order to be appealing to God. It's that now that I have been, rescued, now that I belonging is the thing that shapes the way I live.
So it's almost like you're acting out of a relationship instead of trying to act for a relationship.
That's exactly right. I think every other religion in the world is the second one. I think every religion that I know of in the world anyway, either there's a prophet or a sage or a book or something that's sent to human beings, and they're given a certain morality or a standard of morality to live by, and in living by that morality, living by that standard, then they appeal themselves to God. They make themselves appealing to God, or they try to appropriate God's favor in that way. And Christianity is beginning back in the Old Testament is God rescues you and redeems you, not for any reason. I mean, that's one of the most extraordinary things. I think Deuteronomy 14, for example, is one of the earliest parts where you find it, where God just simply says, I'm not rescuing you because of you.
Yeah.
So God openly sort of eviscerates any hope of ethnocentric superiority or things like that early on in Israel's history. He says, I've rescued you because I love you. And that's exactly what I thought happened to me in New York, in retrospect. I wasn't rescued because I deserved it. I didn't deserve it. I mean, there was nothing about who I was that deserved redemption or forgiveness. And I could have said the same thing if I'd never decided to live an immoral life. If I just stuck with being a good little church kid, there would have been, in fact, in the New Testament, that's actually a worse position to be in.
Yeah.
And I would be able to say there was nothing in me that would have merited or appropriated God's favor. Yeah. See, God saved me because he loved me. And because I'm loved and because I'm rescued from myself, it shapes the way that I want to think about how I do ethics. Yeah.
So God chose Israel, the people of God in the Old Testament, to be priest, kingdom of priest. But then you were talking before this. I totally just Bible dropped. I think I have the record for the most Bible drops on these podcasts.
Yeah, we'll fact check something.
Bible down.
Bible down.
That's an interesting record to have.
Thank you. Yeah, I just slippery hands when it comes to the Bible. I don't know. I get nervous. I don't know. You were talking beforehand. We were talking about this a little bit, and you mentioned 1 Peter 2. 9 says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His possession, so that you may proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light."
Yeah.
Once you were not a people, now you are God's people. Mm-hmm. You had not received mercy, but now you've received mercy. So this kind of selection, that God made Israel kingdom priest. Yeah. Now it's applied to His church.
Yeah. It's really intriguing to me that Peter, you're raised a good Jewish kid, picks up Exodus 19 and selections from Hosea, and applies them to Jew and Gentile.
Yeah.
The key to the Jew and Gentile, though, is they belong to Jesus. And Jesus is as far as I can tell in the New Testament, Jesus is the new Israel. He's the true Israel. Not so much, the church, but Jesus. And so those attached to Jesus now are the redeemed and the elect in Christ. And now they are called this holy nation, royal priesthood. The Old Testament functions almost like a paradigm for the New Testament in some regard. And so now we look and we ask, and I think I think you can demonstrate this as you go through the New Testament. If in fact in Israel, taking care of the poor and also having a particular sexual ethic and being concerned about the disabled and the elderly and judicial ethics and economic ethics, and in interacting with authority and dealing with your family, all those things paradigmatically kind of lift up and land on the New Testament, so that you have Jesus saying things like, "They will know you're my disciples when you love one another." I was taught they would know you're my disciples if you love them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work like that. And I don't know anybody actually, and there probably is somebody, but I don't know anybody who said, well, because this person was nice to me, I figured out that I was a sinner. There's something about a group of people who don't have any reason to like each other.
They're committed.
That are deeply committed to one another. And so they're politically divergent, they're ethnically divergent, they're nationally divergent, but they are deeply committed to one another, and it demands and it begs the question, why? And the why is Christ. And so when Peter picks up these texts, he's just like, oh, this is us. We are the ones who are now called into knowing that there is a real world, a world more durable than ours, a world more eternal and powerful than ours, a God who is now, real, in the New Testament, more obviously triune, that is, unlike any other, attempt at sort of manufacturing a God that human religion might create. And we are the people that now mediate the reality of this God. We are the social and systemic testimony to the reality of this God that is more real than anything that we know.
And living that out is holiness.
Living it out. Living it out is holiness. Yeah.
Okay, we'll close with this. If I'm sitting here, I'm watching, and I'm like, man, I think when Dr. Mooney talked about trying to follow Jesus, but not really following Jesus, trying to be moral, then maybe walking away from that.
Yeah.
What would you say to the person who says, I think I want to turn back to God. I want to turn to God. What would you say to that person? How do you start this relationship?
Yeah. And I think that you have to ask yourself some fairly serious questions about what it is that you're hoping will save you. And if you're just you're a church kid who's been taught the lingo, you're going to have the hardest time with this question.
Yeah.
Someone who's not a church person, they'll just be very obvious and very honest, and they'll say, "Well, I think that either I should be saved because I'm me and I love me, and so I think God should love me," which everyone inherently knows is probably not true.
Sure.
And you can look at just the weight of this sort of psychological and emotional pandemic that occupies particularly Gen Z, but also millennials, and that the whole love yourself thing it's not working because you still have to look in the mirror, and in the inside you still feel unworthy, and so it doesn't. The more that people pour that on about how worthy you are, the more it buries you. It doesn't lift you up as a general rule, and so if you're hoping in that, then you want to abandon that. Don't hope in that anymore.
Yeah.
Turn and run to Jesus and hope in Jesus. Jesus has said he will never cast out anyone who calls on his name. Yeah. All who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. And so there's no the quintessential fear, I think, of particularly American kids between 18 and 25 is this concept of rejection for who they are. Running to Jesus as you are, knowing you need to be saved from who you are, you will never be rejected. This is like the only time in your life that you don't have to. This is not a gamble. You can run to Jesus. Jesus will rescue you.
Yeah.
And save you. And so for some people that are listening, that might mean you have to abandon being your own Lord, like I was, wanting to govern your own morality.
Yeah.
And for others, you have to abandon the notion of being your own savior, of thinking that you're so moral that your own morality will save you. And so but abandoning hope in those things and just saying, okay, I've hoped in those things. Now I inherently know there is no hope to be laid on those things. I'm going to now throw my hope onto Jesus. And I don't know what that looks like, but I know how to express, I'm hoping you'll do this for me, and then I would say go talk to somebody, like you or all of these super helpful people that work in the Office of Spiritual Life, and that would be great. I would be more than happy to talk to you. I'd be more than happy to talk to you as well. Yeah, of course.
Theology.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Hey, well, Dr. Mooney, thank you so much for joining us.
Brian, thanks so much for asking.
This is really fun.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Thank you for joining us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.